Everyone looked at him as if he were a simple ghost. But that night, the ghost woke up. He moved quietly, always in the shadows, a man reduced to silence by years of humiliation. People passed him without noticing. They saw only the janitor, the man with rough hands, the one who carried buckets, who mopped the floors long after everyone else had gone home. His name was Elias. Few remembered it. To them, he was invisible. But Elias was not born invisible. Once he had been someone. Once he had stood in white halls with a sharp mind and steady hands. He had been a surgeon. He had saved lives. He had held power in his fingertips. Until the night everything collapsed. He never spoke about it. He carried the weight of that night like a second skin, too heavy to peel away. And so he accepted this existence. Cleaning floors, emptying trash, nodding quietly at the cruel jokes of those who believed themselves untouchable. Injustice had forced him into silence. But silence has an end. The building he worked in was a tower of glass and steel, owned by a man who ruled with arrogance. Victor Armand, a name spoken with both reverence and fear. CEO, visionary, ruthless. To Victor, men like Elias were nothing, just shadows that kept the light shining for the powerful. He never greeted him. He never even looked him in the eyes. That night, Victor was hosting a gathering. Executives filled the top floor with laughter and champagne. Money and power floated in the air, heavy as smoke. Elias worked below, scrubbing the marble floor that would never bear his name. He could hear the echoes of their joy. Each laugh cut into him like a blade, but he kept working. That was his place now. Then came the sound, a sudden crash. Not the careless laughter of the rich. A real crash, followed by a silence so sharp it pierced the building itself. Elias froze. His instincts, long buried, surged awake. He left his mop against the wall and walked toward the sound. On the top floor, chaos had replaced laughter. Victor Armand lay collapsed on the ground, his face pale, his body trembling. The executives circled him, shouting, panicking, but none of them knew what to do. His lips turned blue. His breathing faltered. A heart in rebellion. And in that moment, the invisible ghost stepped forward. Elias's voice cut through the confusion. Calm, precise, commanding. Move back. They looked at him, startled, the janitor, the nobody. Some hesitated. Some even laughed in disbelief. But Elias did not falter. He pushed them aside and knelt by Victor's side. His hands, rough from years of cleaning, remembered. They remembered every incision, every procedure, every emergency. He tore open Victor's shirt. He listened. He felt. He acted. Compressions, breaths, rhythm. His mind worked faster than panic. He shouted instructions no one dared disobey. Someone brought the defibrillator. No one knew how to use it. Elias did. He placed the pads with the certainty of a man who had done this before. The shock hit. Victor's body jerked. The silence grew heavier. Then air, breath, a heartbeat, fragile but present. The powerful man had been dragged back from the edge of the abyss, and the ghost had done it. The room was silent now, but not out of panic, out of shock. The executives stared at Elias, as if seeing him for the first time. The janitor was gone. In his place stood something else, something undeniable. Victor Armand coughed, gasped, and opened his eyes. His gaze met Elias's. For the first time, he looked at him, truly looked, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as the man who had just stolen him back from death itself. Hours later, when the chaos had faded, Victor called for him. Alone, in his vast office, still weak, still shaken, he asked the question that burned in his chest. "Who are you?" Elias looked at him. His eyes, once dim, carried storms. He answered with a voice low, steady, heavy with history. "I am the man you never saw. Victor frowned. You saved my life. That's no janitor's skill. And the story, buried for years, began to spill. Elias spoke of the life he once had, of the surgeries, of the night when one powerful decision had destroyed him. A patient he could have saved, but politics had interfered. He had been forced to take the blame for someone else's mistake, stripped of his license, cast aside, left to rot in silence. He had lost everything, his career, his family, his dignity. And now he swept floors in the same world that had buried him. Victor listened, torn between disbelief and something deeper, shame. For he had seen Elias as nothing more than dirt under his shoes. Now he saw the truth. Power had blinded him. But Victor was not a man to bend easily. He asked, almost with suspicion, "Why save me then? Why not let me die?" Elias's answer was cold, but it carried fire. "Because I am not like you." The words cut deep. Victor leaned back, haunted. For the first time in years, the walls of his arrogance cracked. He saw himself reflected in the eyes of a man he had ignored, and the reflection was not kind. Days passed. Victor returned to work, but his steps were slower, his thoughts heavier. He could not forget. The ghost haunted him now, not because Elias sought revenge, but because Elias existed, silent, invisible, and yet stronger than all of them. Victor began to test him. Small questions, demands for advice, as if searching for proof that this was real. And every time, Elias answered with a clarity that made Victor uneasy. Knowledge, wisdom, precision. It was undeniable. And yet, the world remained the same. Elias still cleaned the floors, still carried buckets, still nodded to those who mocked him, until the next crisis struck. It came not as a sudden heart attack, but as something colder. A scandal. Documents leaked, exposing corruption at the highest levels of Victor's empire. Overnight, his power trembled. Investors pulled back. The media circled like vultures. His name, once feared, now dragged through the mud. In desperation, he turned again to Elias. "You've lived in shadows. You know how to survive when the world spits on you. Tell me, what do I do?" Elias's reply was not immediate. He looked at the man, broken but still proud, still clinging to control. He let silence weigh on him before speaking. "You want me to save your empire, as I saved your life." Victor clenched his jaw. "Yes." And Elias said, "Then you must first learn what it means to be powerless." The words fell heavy, like chains. Victor did not answer. He did not know how. But the storm outside grew worse. The company teetered. Enemies sharpened their knives. And the one man who knew how to cut through the darkness refused to play the game without a price. One night, Victor found Elias again in the empty halls, mopping the floor as if nothing had changed. He stared at him for a long time before asking, "What is your condition?" Elias stopped, his hands gripping the mop, his eyes burning. "If I help you, things will not return to what they were. You will not rise again as you were. If I help you, it will be to change everything, to build something human in a world that has forgotten what that means. That is the condition." Victor's face twisted with conflict. To submit to a janitor, to a man once invisible. But he knew, deep down, that this was not a janitor. This was the ghost that had saved his life, the ghost who now demanded his soul. And so the battle began, not with fists, not with knives, but with power, pride, and truth. Two men bound by fate. One who had everything and lost it. One who had everything and stood on the edge of losing it all. But power is never given freely. It must be torn from the hands of those who cling to it. And when the first betrayal came, it was not from outside. It was from within. The betrayal came quietly, like all poison does. One of Victor's closest allies, a man who had toasted beside him on countless nights of triumph, was the one who leaked the final documents. It wasn't greed. It wasn't even revenge. It was survival. When a ship sinks, rats run first. Victor was furious, but fury does not mend a broken empire. He turned once more to Elias, his voice shaking not with arrogance, but with something he had long forgotten: desperation. "They want me destroyed. Tell me what to do." Elias looked at him, calm as ever, but his eyes carried something Victor feared: the weight of truth. "You cannot fight them with the same weapons. If you try, you will lose. You must do what no one expects of you." Victor laughed bitterly. "And what would that be? To beg? To kneel?" Elias stepped closer. His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a scalpel through flesh. "To confess." The word fell like a hammer. Confess to the world, to his enemies, to his victims. Victor's pride recoiled at the thought. His empire was built on power, on fear, on the illusion of perfection. To confess would mean exposing the rot. It would mean surrender. But Elias continued, "Your empire is dying because it was built on lies. If you want it to live, it must be rebuilt on truth. Not the truth that flatters you, the truth that burns." Victor's hands trembled. "You think the world forgives? It does not. It will crush me." Elias's voice was iron. "Yes, but it may let something greater rise from the ashes. And you will not be remembered as a man who clung to lies until the end, but as one who faced the fire." For the first time in years, Victor felt tears pressing at the corners of his eyes, not of weakness, of fear of losing everything he thought defined him. But the storm outside allowed no hesitation. The board turned against him. The investors pulled away. The public demanded blood. The decision was his: cling to the ruins or walk into the fire. And so, with Elias beside him, he chose the fire. The press conference shook the world. Victor Armand, the untouchable, stood before the cameras and confessed. He admitted corruption. He admitted greed. He admitted the lives ruined under his watch. His voice broke. His hands shook. But he spoke every word Elias told him he must. The fallout was immediate. His empire collapsed. Stock prices plummeted. All eyes abandoned him. He was left stripped of power, stripped of wealth, stripped of everything that had once made him feared. The world celebrated his downfall. But among the ruins, something unexpected happened. People who had been silenced by his empire began to speak. Workers, victims, families, their stories came out, raw and painful. And for the first time, someone listened. For the first time, Victor's empire was no longer about him. It was about them. Victor, now a shadow of the man he once was, turned again to Elias. "You destroyed me." Elias shook his head. "No, you destroyed yourself long ago. I only showed you the mirror." Victor collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. "And what am I now?" "Nothing." Elias's voice was soft but merciless. "Now you are human." Those words echoed in Victor's mind like a curse and a blessing. For days he wandered his empty house, haunted not by wealth lost, but by the silence of truth. He thought of the faces of those he had wronged. He thought of Elias, mopping the floors for years while the world spit on him. And something shifted. One night he appeared in the janitor's closet, where Elias sat resting after another long shift. Victor stood there silently, as if unsure how to speak. Finally he said, "Teach me." Elias looked at him. "Teach you what?" "To live with nothing. To build with nothing. To start again, not as a king, but as a man." And for the first time, Elias saw not the arrogant ruler, but the broken child buried beneath the empire of steel and glass. He saw a chance not to save Victor, but to save what could be built after him. Elias agreed. But he warned, this is not redemption. Redemption does not come from words. It comes from wounds that heal others. If you want to start again, you must bleed for those you once ignored. And so the strange partnership began. Victor sold his mansion. He dissolved what remained of his empire. He poured what little he still controlled into foundations, into hospitals, into shelters. Always under Elias's condition. No speeches, no cameras, no glory. Acts done in silence, for those who lived in silence. It was humiliating. It was painful, but it was real. For every stone he placed in this new path, Elias watched him. Not as a friend, not as an enemy, as a witness. And slowly, Victor began to change. He walked through hospitals not as the owner, but as a man who sat at the bedside of the forgotten. He listened to stories he had once silenced. He heard the voices of the invisible. He saw Elias in all of them. But the past does not forgive easily. One night, while visiting a shelter, Victor was confronted by the daughter of a man his empire had ruined. She spat in his face. She cursed him. She called him a murderer. His guards wanted to push her away, but Victor stopped them. He stood there, silent, and let the words pierce him. Later, shaking, he told Elias, "She was right. I deserve every wound." Elias replied, "Then let every wound remind you of what you must never become again." And so it continued. The powerful man stripped to nothing. The invisible man standing as his guide. Two ghosts, walking in opposite directions, yet bound by fate. But fate is cruel. One evening, as Elias returned home after a long shift, shadows followed him. Men sent not by Victor, but by those who had thrived in the darkness of his empire. Corrupt politicians, hidden hands who feared the new truth rising. Elias had become dangerous, not because he had power, but because he carried truth. They cornered him in an alley. Words were exchanged. Threats turned to violence. Elias fought, but years of exhaustion had weakened him. They left him bleeding on the cold ground, a man who had lived in shadows now swallowed by them. When Victor heard, something inside him shattered. He rushed to the hospital, only to find Elias broken, pale, yet still alive. He took his hand and whispered, "Stay. I still need you." Elias opened his eyes slowly. Pain clouded them, but his voice was steady. "No, you do not need me anymore. You have seen what you must see. The rest is yours." Victor shook his head, tears falling. "I cannot do this without you." Elias's hand squeezed his, weak but unyielding. "You can. Because I was never here to save you. I was here to remind you what it means to be saved." Those words were his legacy. Elias survived the attack, but he never returned to cleaning floors. His body was too frail. He lived quietly, away from the empire, away from the spotlight. But his presence lingered, like a ghost that never truly fades. Victor, scarred and humbled, continued the path alone. Every decision he made carried the echo of Elias's voice. Every act of compassion was a tribute. Every wound he endured was a reminder. The world never forgave Victor completely. His name remained tainted, his past never erased. But among the forgotten, among the invisible, whispers grew. Whispers of a man who had fallen from power and learned to kneel. Whispers of the ghost who had saved him, who had turned arrogance into humility. And in those whispers lived the true legacy, not of Victor, not even of Elias, but of the truth that power can bury, but never kill. Years later, when Elias passed quietly in his sleep, only a few came to his funeral. There were no cameras, no grand speeches, just silence. But in that silence, Victor stood, head bowed, tears on his face. He whispered, "You are the ghost who woke me." And as he walked away, he carried with him the weight of those words, a weight that would never leave. For in the end, this was not the story of a janitor or a CEO. It was the story of two men bound by injustice, by arrogance, by pain, by truth. A story that asked one question: what is power worth if it costs you your soul? And the answer echoed like a shadow in the dark: power dies. Truth endures.